Hello from the Authors Guild. My name is Johnny, and thank you all for joining us tonight for this event, Minding Your Poetry Business. This is the latest event in our series, Business Bootcamps for Writers, and we're here to discuss making a living through poetry. The series is brought to you by the Authors Guild Foundation with support from the National Endowment for the Arts and Penguin Random House. And tonight's talk was produced in collaboration with Blue Stoop, a home for writers in Philadelphia. Thank you to Blue Stoop, and you can find out more about them at bluestoop.org. For those of you who heard about the event through Blue Stoop or on social media, we invite you to check out the Authors Guild at authorsguild.org to learn more about what we do to help writers in the business and legal aspects of authorship. So thank you so much to our panelists for joining us here tonight. And thank you to the audience. Thanks for sending in pre-submitted questions. We have those in hand and we'll answer as many as we can. But if you have more questions, you can use the Q&A box below, and we'll get to those toward the end. There are subtitles, closed captions available if you prefer as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to poet, singer, educator, and curator Yolanda Wisher. Yolanda is a two-time poet laureate, curator of spoken word at Philadelphia Contemporary, and the author of Monk Eats an Afro. She performs a blend of poetry and song with her band, the Afro Eaters. Yolanda, thank you so much for organizing the panel and putting this talk together. And I'll turn it over to you now. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Johnny. And thanks to everyone for joining us tonight. Thank you to the Authors Guild and Blue Stoop for inviting me to host this business boot camp for writers. When I was invited to think about a panel that I wanted to host, I thought about poetry and money because it's something poets don't always talk about in public. We often talk shop in secret or in private. And so we're doing something a little different this evening. And I'm joined by four powerhouse poets with Philly ties, who I really respect for the way that they handle their business as poets. And so I wanted to have a conversation with them and to kind of share the wealth of that conversation with more folks. So I'm glad that we're able to do this tonight. So I want to do a little round of introductions for everyone, so you can see who we're working with. Denise Froman is a poet, performer, and educator from New York City, a Threshold Fellow at Headland Center for the Arts. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, The Breakbeat Poets, Latinx, Nepantla, an anthology for queer poets of color, ESPNW, and elsewhere. She lives in Philadelphia. Welcome, Denise. Reina J. Leon, PhD, is the author of Canticle of Idols, Boogeyman Dawn, Sombra, Dislocate, in the chapbooks Profeta, Without Refuge, and Orito to Atabe, Essays on the Mothering Self. She is a founding editor of the Acentos Review, an online quarterly international journal devoted to the promotion and publication of Latinx arts, lead coordinator for Nomadic Press in Philadelphia, an emerging digital archivist and artist, and a senior researcher on various grants in education and literature. You can find her on all the platforms at Reina Leon. 2021 Philadelphia Poet Laureate Tripita B. Mason is the founder of Healing Verse Philly Phone Line, a hallmark project of her poet laureate tenure. Mason is a Pew, Academy of American Poets, and Aspen Word Fellow, and also a member of several local organizations where she uses the arts to help mobilize and build community. Originally from Bali, Indonesia, Cynthia Dewi Oka is the author of Fire is Not a Country and Salvage from Northwestern University Press, and Nomad of Salt and Hard Water, 2016, from Thread Makes Blanket Press. A recipient of the Leeway Foundation's Transformation Award and the Tupelo Quarterly Poetry Prize, she is currently poet in residence at the Amy Clampett House. So welcome, Denise, Reina, Tripita, Cynthia. I love y'all. I'm just so excited to be here with all of you. I know there's gonna be some gems that we all drop tonight for each other and for the world, because honestly, I'm here for the wisdom as well. So I have a few questions, and I know that the audience was able to pre-submit questions, so we'll pull from both sets, and also we'll be a little improvisational and pull from the Q&A if y'all feel so inclined to share a question with us or a comment. So I wanted to just give everybody an opportunity to talk a few minutes and share how you make money as a poet. Like we're just gonna jump right into it. How do you break up the pie? For me, the pie is writing, teaching, performing, consulting. There's lots of different hats that I wear. Some are more lucrative than others. And so I wonder about what are the hats that you wear as a poet? Um, and what does that look like in terms of making money or doing business? So why don't we start with you, Denise?
Thanks so much, Yolanda, for gathering us. Thanks to the Authors Guild. Really excited to be part, and Blue Stoop, really excited to be part of this conversation because you're right. We really don't talk about money and the business of writing enough in public spaces. And so I'm happy to bring this conversation into a more public forum. Uh, for me, I've been a touring poet for, over a decade now, or I think over a decade now. It did not happen overnight by any means. It was not something that I thought was even possible. But after many years of sort of workshops and being in community, and sort of just digging my heels into local open mics and schools and really doing the work in my community, I was fortunate enough and really lucky enough to have some of my work go viral many years ago. And that sort of launched me in part into a national audience that I did not expect at all. But what I was able to do was then sort of turn around and see this as an opportunity to leave my full-time job as a public relations coordinator, working at a museum, and prior to that or after that a university, and tour for many many years. And so uh, for the last, again, over a decade, I've been a touring poet, primarily at schools and conferences, as well as workshop residencies with high school students and college students primarily. But prior to that, we've all taught workshops K through 12, I'm sure. So but this year is really interesting in that it's actually the first year that my income will not primarily be coming from touring. I think the pandemic shifted a lot for many of us. And for me, it was the first time in many, many years that I was not living out of my suitcase. And it offered me a moment to reflect on sort of the privilege and the luck to have done this for so many years, but also what it has cost me, which is sort of just like living out of my suitcase and not sort of having the stillness and the time to devote to the projects, the long-term projects that are really sort of like knocking around my bones. And so I am a current fellow at Headland Center for the Arts. I also was recently named a Baldwin Emerson Fellow at Baldwin for the Arts. So this is the first year where these two fellowships will offer me the space and the time to not do as many events, and to sort of dig my heels into these long-term projects that I'm happy to talk about later. And so I'm actually undergoing a really big shift in sort of where how I'm going to support my livelihood. And I'm actually feeling really fortunate and blessed, and feel like everything brought me to this moment of being able to make that shift, which for me, at sort of this juncture in my poetic practice and for how many years I've been writing and performing, has been important to me. And I should say, for the people who are tuning in and maybe not familiar with some of us, or not familiar with my work, I'm both a poet and a performer. And so often I'm hired specifically because students and young people are galvanized by the word read aloud, and by seeing a poet bring a poem into an embodied space on a stage, right? And so my core audience has typically been young people, and also adults and elders as well, but primarily young people who want to shake up the world and speak truth to power. And it's young people are a big part of my creative practice as well. So I'm hoping I'm answering the question, and I'll leave it there for now.
I'm so excited to see what happens when you get out of that suitcase. So,
Listen, the suitcase was burned in 2020.
thank you, Denise. So how about you, Raina? I know it's probably a little bit different, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I love that the language there is about do any of you wear more than one hat? Because I have like 55 hats. So I am, in addition to being a poet and writer, I also do a lot of events with universities, especially targeted with educators, academics. So I do a lot of workshops around narrative medicine and the use of our stories, or holding space for the storytelling of others, as well as talking about publishing, because I co-founded the Essentials Review, and we've been in existence for almost 15 years now. I do curation work for a number of museums, so I've done that over the years, and as well as reading series. So I founded a reading series called Two Rivers in Philly, and that is, we're having our third reading in May. So, you know, and as well as being the lead for Nomadic Press, and I've worked with them as an author previously, as well as a curator and frequent contributor. So how many hats can Raina wear? And so what I'm discovering is that most of my, but I also have a full-time gig, right? Like I am a scholar, I am a full professor of education. That is where my academic expertise is. And I am also visiting professor at Dominican. So I teach creative writing work. I'm also an adjunct with Mills College. So I teach for them. And then I teach one-off workshops and workshop series and workshops for organizations. So, you know, in poetry and writing and DEI work, again, how many hats can Raina wear? And I'm a mom, right, of two babies. So they don't give me money. And I tell them all the time that they don't have jobs, so why are they breaking those toys? But you know, we can remake them, it's fine, it's an art project. But these things of like the juggling also becomes important with like the conversations around this is my work, and I'm really fortunate within my family too, of when I say that I need the time to write the thing because that is my work, and I have this essay to write, and that also pays me this little bit, and I'm doing this curation work, and that requires time. My people are like, okay, that is Raina's work. We have no idea what she's talking about, but we're going to create the space and leave her alone in the basement so she can do her work. And I think for me in this space of what I am learning is to how to create a metric for what will pay the bills, but actually that's not as important to me ultimately as being joyful in my practice, because the bills that will come. But if my psyche is all awry, if my spirit is all awry, then everything else will crumble anyway. So making sure that there is a space for the quiet that I need to be whole, and that extending into my writing, because wholeness and space leads to creation, leads to other abundant things that will come to me, but I can also pass on to others. So I hope that answers your question.
A woman, yes. Thank you. Thank you. How about you, Mr. Pita?
Yeah, so it's been great to hear the other poets talk about this experience. It had me cheat a little bit because I could reflect a little bit on mine. So I do want to tell you thank you also, Yolanda, for having us here, and Blue Stoop, of course, you know, shout out always. I think for me, I've always been employed in something else as well as being a full-time artist. I can relate to when Denise is saying, you know, trying to juggle all these priorities, and Raina as well. So I've been in those positions. Currently, I am employed. I'm working in the mental health field, but I am also doing all these other poetry activities and poetry related activities. So mainly for me, it is workshops and residencies and special projects. So when I have to really negotiate these things around time and space. So I may use a lot of my vacation time from my job to be able to do projects. So I enjoy working with youth. So a lot of projects that I do are related to youth, teaching them, in school. Because I work in the social services field, there's a natural connection of being able to go into institutions, correctional institutions, shelters. A lot of my work is done in that realm. And then I'm also able to get special projects and grants and collaborate with other artists because I'm able to, people are looking, a lot for writing as a source of healing, writing as a source of thinking about one's circumstance or storytelling. So I've found a way to be able to merge the two. I also would like to be able to, I would also a little bit of performing, because I do collaborate with Monette Sutler. I've collaborated with Yolanda. So in terms of reading and performing along with I'm not a singer, but just be able to perform along with the poet as poetry with the band. Yeah, that's how I make a living. And I do that because I am involved in special projects overseas that my writing career supports and that income supports. I've had the benefit of being able to rely on a full-time job, but I've also had the desire not to have to create, as Yolanda knows, at 5 and 6 in the morning, or 11, 12, and 1 at night, or the weekend. And that's when I have to do all of these projects if I don't take off time. But those would be the main ways that I've created, that I continue to do: workshops, residencies, performances, and some, limited writing and submission.
Thank you, Tripita. I have to say, listening to the three of y'all so far, I'm a little exhausted by the work that y'all are all doing. I'm like, I'm already tired, but I'm also doing it myself. But I know it feels like there's a lot of time and a lot of juggling that goes into making this work. What about you, Cynthia? How do you do this?
Hi, everyone. I did take notes. I'm just like, okay, tips for myself. Thank you, Yolanda and the Authors Guild and Blue Stoop and everybody. I think for me, I've had an interesting journey. I was always a mom. I was a mom very young. So I was a mom before I did any of this stuff. So that was a really big constraint on sort of my decisions and my thinking about money and around like, what might I choose to do? So for the majority actually of my writing life, I was organizing. I was a community organizer I also organized nationally. And I wrote, I really relate to what you were saying, Tripita, for like years, all my books were written like at 4 a.m. Before anyone else woke up. And I think I feel I have and I feel like that has affected sort of like, that's also shaped my relationship to my art in a particular way, because I feel that it is the one place where I got to be free. I'm like, this is where I get to think freely. This is where I get to say what I need to say. This is where I get to feel, where the rest of my life was very often, like I had to carry out other people's agendas, if that makes sense. So I think it actually took quite a bit of time before I started thinking about writing as like a career. And that shift has really only happened in the last few years. So prior to that, I was like doing one-off workshops, or I was, or sometimes I got paid for poems for like commissions or for publications. And then in the last few years, I've also been teaching and performing more. And, like I get brought out to like universities to speak and to perform and to talk with students. And I also get to collaborate sometimes, like Yolanda, and I did a couple of collaborations recently that were really fun and amazing. And then, this past year, I got very, very fortunate because I received this residency. I got to live in a house. So I'm still there right now in Lenox, Massachusetts, and they pay me to live here. and it's one of the very few residencies. I actually don't know another one that has no requirements. Like they give you a house, they pay you, you live here, and you do whatever you got to do. So if you need to rest for a whole year, you can rest for a whole year. If you want to work on projects, you work on projects. You want to experiment, and then you get to do that. They give you like a little TV. I think it's to discourage like too much video gaming. But it's been a really, really big gift for me to just like experience for the first time, because I think I think we forget that for the majority of like American literature, this was how people wrote. And this was like a privilege that was only afforded to wealthy white men, and I get to do this for like 1 year, and it creates other complications because I had to turn down a teaching contract to do it. I have to like basically figure out what my next steps are. Like, am I going to get a job? Am I going to deepen my freelancing work? All of these other questions. So I just wanted to name that because residencies and fellowships do create sort of like conditions where we can focus on projects. I also want to name that, I think that we should want more and we should ask for more, like things that create more consistency and sustainability for our lives, because this was literally what like all of those dudes had, that we are still, having to like read today in American academic spaces. So anyway, I just wanted to name that, but I don't think I have much to add in terms of, I feel like everyone else has also said so much. So that would be my 2 cents on that.
So there's a question in the Q&A that kind of relates to what you were just saying, that when you, Linda Drittel asked, when you all say you have collaborated on projects, what kind of collaborations do you mean? So do you want to talk a little bit about our recent collaboration?
Yes. So in her capacity as curator at Philadelphia Contemporary, I got to collaborate on 2 projects, both of which were really cool. So I'm going to mention them both. One was a billboard poem. And we also collaborated with the Rail Park in Philadelphia for that, as well as Asian Arts Initiative. And the idea was like, what would you put up on a billboard? And it ended up being this kind of multilingual experimental poem that tries to kind of imagine a better future than the one that we have. So that was like one cool project. The billboard was up for, I believe it was about a month, right, Yolanda?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then the other thing that we recently collaborated on was the WAP party. And Denise was also all up in that. And the WAP party was, if you guys may have heard of the Association of Writers and Writing Programs Conference, AWP, that's like the biggest conference nationally for people in literature. And they go from city to city like every year. So this year, the conference was happening in Philadelphia. And because AWP, it's a great space for like writers to connect and to share their work and build community. But it is also quite expensive and not necessarily accessible very often to like the people who live in the communities that AWP comes to visit. So one of the things that we wanted to do was create a space that, really showcased poetic practices in Philadelphia, and for it to be a place where people could gather. I mean, like the pandemic has, really isolated a lot of folks, and we wanted to create a space where people can dance and eat and listen to poems and also karaoke. And that was a collaboration. It was like really, really amazing, and it was super fun.
I loved it. It was just a really special event. And for me, it's extension of the work that I'm trying to do as a poet in the world. I feel like a lot of what y'all all said resonated with me in terms of your journey to the career of being a poet. And I've also been doing work. For the last 25 years in Philly, I've been doing lots of things, but a lot of it has been full-time work with other organizations. I started out as an English teacher. I taught English 9th through 12th grade English for 10 years. And then I left that job to work for the Philadelphia Mural Arts Program as a director of art ed. So I was an arts administrator for a while. And it was there that I started at Mural Arts, starting to think about poetry as public art and thinking about how could poems take up the same kind of space that murals take up in our city. And that just kind of blew my mind. I started thinking bigger about my poems, bigger than just books, bigger than just teaching. I started thinking about really creating platforms for poets in the city of Philadelphia. And that led me to curation. The first curator of spoken word, maybe ever. I hate to say it because somebody's probably already done it and been doing it and just didn't have the title. But we created this position at Philadelphia Contemporary, the art organization that I work with. The curator of spoken word was funded by the Bauer Foundation and allowed me to create projects for the city as a citywide kind of representative and ambassador of this scene. And it's a full-time job. It's actually a 9-to-5 job. But for me, it's represented this progression of getting to a point where most of my day could be dedicated to poetry, both administratively and creatively. And that's a juggling act because, it's poetry all day. I'm poetry 24/7. And sometimes you're like, man, I love poetry, but this is a little much for me. But there's so many rooms in the House of Poetry, right? I don't know who said that. Maybe it was Nikki Finney said that. So many rooms in this House of Poetry to explore and to walk in. And so I feel like this poetry work is spirit work for me. So I'm gonna find a way to do it as much as I can. And you're right, y'all. It doesn't always matter if you're getting paid for it. And so when we talk about the business, it's for some people that business is a 10-hour business. For some people that's a 50-hour business. I think it's all good no matter what. I'm wondering, what kind of goals are you setting for yourselves now, business goals? Like for me, one of my goals, and I'm looking at Marshall's comment in the Q&A, one of my more recent goals is to get an assistant, because the more I do, I'm just like, I need somebody to help me with these emails and help me manage my calendar. And I know, Denise, you have an assistant because I've interacted with your assistant. So I'd love to hear, that's my goal, just having extra support. I wonder what kind of support, Denise, maybe you could start since you have the assistant. What kind of business goals do you have?
This is a great question because getting an assistant was a huge goal of mine. And, really working and trying to get steady income to be able to get to a place where I could afford an assistant, where that made sense for me was really, really critical. But it also meant that I pushed myself and I handled all of my own booking for the majority of my touring career. I did not have an agent. I was not part of an agency. I do have an agency that gets additional events for me every now and then, but I don't have an exclusive sort of contract with them. So I really took my career into my own hands and bet on myself. And I'm saying that was the choice I made for my situation, which understanding that the audience that I was building locally all those years was now turning into somewhat of a national audience, right? And so I want to be as specific as I can because I'm assuming people are coming here, they're not full-time or they are full-time and they're trying to take that next leap in their writing career and understand, who do you have on your team? How do you do this? I have a personal assistant, I have an entertainment lawyer, and I do not have an agent. In my experience, the entertainment lawyer is as critical, if not more critical for me than an agent. Because I have already incoming inquiries, I don't necessarily need someone to go out and get more inquiries. I need people to field the inquiries that are coming in. But again, I'm speaking to you as someone who's been doing this for really like a long time now, or long enough. Mm-hmm. My personal assistant, not a personal assistant, my assistant that handles the inquiries, that's been something that's been within the last 4 years, I think. And it was when I was reaching the threshold of, I literally cannot answer these emails because I'm on a plane. Like, they were coming in steady enough. I had stretched myself to where, like, being on the stage and then going back to the hotel, I was starting to fall behind on emails. And so I just pushed myself as much as I could and filled my plate. And once it was full and there was overflow, I said, okay, now I can afford to hire an assistant part-time. Right. And that just made my life more manageable because it was just becoming untenable. Right. But that was the majority of my touring career. And I started touring by cold emailing colleges and universities hand by hand. I had done it not mass, not MailChimp, right? Not like some web platform where I dumped in a bunch of emails. I physically went to each website, went to each department and put people's names and emails and did that for years, right? And it turned out that of the thousands of emails I sent, I think the first year that I did that, like the fall, I got like 8 gigs from universities, right? And then the next spring, I got like 15, right? And I had saved up enough. This is how I went full time. I left my job, not by diving into an ocean of like, we're just going to take this leap of faith. No, I knew I had built a local audience, that I had been doing workshops, that I had been in community spaces, that I have sort of cut my teeth, right? And like really worked on my skill and my craft. And then I had a fellowship from the Leeway Foundation, the Transformation Award, that did transform my life. That award was how I was able to go full time. It's a $15,000 grant for women and trans artists who have been creating art for social change for 5 or more years in Philadelphia. I had saved up a couple of $1,000s from my job, my 9-to-5 job, with the $15,000 that I got from Leeway, and said, if I have a bad year, I can still pay my bills. I had a bad year and I still paid my bills, and I got like a handful of gigs, but then it freed me up to keep emailing and keep performing. And once people got word, oh, Denise is not at a 9-to-5. She's available. These administrators talk to each other. They go to their own AWP conferences. They're all looking for student activities and English departments and Latino studies and LGBTQ centers. And they all talk to each other, that it became sort of a snowball in conjunction with some of the videos of public performances that I had given, where those were uploaded online by different platforms, right? And so that's how I was able to go full time, and then just sort of kept that energy going and just cold emailing a bunch of people. Over time, it became really prudent for me to get an entertainment lawyer, which is something that's been more recent, because of the collaborations that I have been a part of have escalated and sort of in like the visibility. So for example, I've done contracts with large corporations where I was the only one that looked at that contract, and I lost a lot of money. And that was the biggest lesson that I ever learned, is I was a small fish in a big pond, and they had a whole legal team. And the only thing that I knew, though, even though I lost a lot of money in that contract, was that I did not agree to a work for hire contract. Do not agree to a work for hire contract for a commission. It means they own your property. So when they came back to me and said, we want to use this poem for different purposes, right? They had to come back and pay me again. So that was at least one thing that I did in that contract, but I still lost a lot of money because I just didn't know at the time. Right. And so for certain smaller commissions, for example, with Greater Philadelphia Cultural Affairs, right, or even like the Metropolitan Museum of Art, I've done collaborations. Sometimes I'll handle those on my own because I sort of have a template contract that lawyers have set up for me and passed along to me, and I have a sense of what to look for. Right. But for commissions, and I do a handful of them each year, like for ESPN or for Indeed, or I've done voiceover work, right? I'll pass those to my entertainment lawyer, who literally can negotiate the fee, and has colleagues in this field that understand what I should be getting paid, and this is one person that could do 2 jobs. So in these instances, I don't feel like I've needed an agent. Now in literary spaces, now when we talk about book publishing, that's a different scenario, which Raina and Cynthia and Yolanda Tripita can maybe talk to more, right? But I'm speaking as sort of how I handle some of the incoming inquiries that come in. I think an assistant and an entertainment lawyer have been pivotal for my career. But again, that did not happen overnight. That happened as sort of the some of the inquiries, had built up to a level. But I think that's important to sort of say, because people have questions about what kind, do I need an agent? Do I need an assistant? Do I not? My advice is do as much of it as you can on your own, because your career is in your hands. You will be the one that is looking over these inquiries, and you need to know what's in your contracts, right? You need to know what you're agreeing to. And what I will say, the last thing that I'll say, I'm trying to get as much detail as I can out, is when you sign contracts, typically you want to try to ensure that the contract is as limited as possible. And so when we think about contracts, I want you to think about usage, and having it spelled out in the contract. I'm going to show up to share this poem for this event. I am going to agree to this longer project. These are the deliverables. These are the number of poems that I'll be delivering. These are how they will be distributed or showcased. Will they be on a billboard? Will they be, right? How will they be presented, right? But you want to limit it to this engagement. And it can be a number of engagements, right? But you want to make sure that your rate is scaled, is appropriate for the scope of the project, right? But it means when you have a contract that lays this out, it means that if they want to use your work, right, that you retain the copyright, because hopefully you didn't sign a work for hire unless you don't care about the 10-second poem you're writing for Sprite, okay? Which I would still say, don't sign a work for hire contract, because they will have to come back to you if they say, and that's you betting on yourself. That's you saying, I'm going to create something lasting. I'm going to create something meaningful. And that's why a lot of brands and commissions, and I'm speaking sort of to this niche thing, because I think it's important, want poets, right? Because we do this language thing. So I'll leave it there. And hopefully that answers some of too much that I just bit off.
Dang, Denise, Lauren Hunter's like, preach in the chat, in the response, no work for hire contracts. And I agree, the lawyer is such an important part that you don't always think, just having somebody to run contracts by. If you have lawyer friends that do that work, there are friends that I have that I sometimes just like, could you look this over for me? I think it's so important. I've also retained a lawyer doing an album project. So I just recorded a poetry and music album. It was really important to work with a lawyer on the contracts for that with my band, and also with the organization, to make sure that we were talking about where the royalties are going in terms of, sales from this record. So super important, the legal aspects of the work and the contracts. And I think sometimes poets, we don't do enough kind of due diligence in reading reading the fine print. So all great info. Thank you. I'm going to kick it over to you, Raina. What goals are you working towards, or what you might want to just sound off like Denise on some of these questions in the chat or the Q&A that you might see?
Sure. I do want to talk about the contracting thing for a second.
It's going to get real in the contracts, I was about to say.
Oh, goodness. The one thing with the contract, or a few things. One thing is to learn from the contracts of others. When you see a beautiful contract, every now and then I get a beautiful contract from somebody else for a collaborative work that's going on. And I'm working on this album thing for my first book. And the sound producer, she sent me her contract, and I was like, your contract is beautiful. So learn from the contracts and materials that you get from other people. Learn from press kits. Learn from all these things where you're like,
contract, right?
Read the contract. I learned very late about one of my books. I ended up buying the rights back to my book because I wasn't very happy with my contract ultimately. But if I knew then what I know now, I wouldn't have signed it. And so I had to buy those rights back. So goals for myself as far as business, I'm holding on to the bookshelf where this computer is because I hate paperwork so much. I hate it so much. I will do it. It will be done. I am astute at it, but like the intricacies of pulling all the receipts and things together. I don't like it at all. I will do it. I have a nice folder. I organize it. It's lovely, and then I look at it with despair. I don't like it at all. My goal is to have an accountant where I can just say, here, here are the folders, do the things. It's not something that brings me joy. And I think that that is something that I am ready to release, so I can do other things.
You know, I think I talked to Denise about that a few years ago, and I think you recommended QuickBooks to me and the QuickBooks for self-employed. And that helped me to start separating the personal from the business expenses without having to hire the accountant right away.
Yeah. A friend of mine told me about Bench as a mechanism for accounting as well, because her income was poet as well as freelance consulting. And so her business intake has gotten to the point where it actually makes sense for that platform. But I'm looking into QuickBooks as well. Another goal for me is one around time. My goal is to be retired in 10 years. Isn't that ambitious? Let's go for that. And in my visioning for retirement, there is a residency space where there is a space for other writers and also a space for me. So that won't be quite retired, but I'm creating a different kind of community. And so my vision is working towards that too. The space that Cynthia talked about for one's writing, but sharing that with others. But that means that my investments have to be right for that to happen. And so I'm working towards, my partner and I are in the space of shopping around for investment consulting people to make our money work differently as to what we have right now, so that our vision for creating more space for creation and sharing of that abundance can actually happen. Yeah. And so I'm strong visioning for that.
I like that. I like that long-term thinking, but also like retirement thinking. I love that.
Yeah.
What about you, Cynthia? What goals are you working towards?
I think, I don't know, maybe this might be a little bit more vague, but it is also because of, I feel like the moment that I'm in, because I'm in transition right now. I think my goal is really to just be financially independent and secure, doing something that I like. So like that is the condition, you know. And so in the past, I've been, you know, writing in different genres takes like chops. Like you got to develop the skill to do that. So I've been working hard on, you know, like scaling up as in prose and screenwriting recently, because it's like an extension. It's like I started with poetry because poetry was what I could fit in my life as a single mother. And then now there's just kind of, now my kid is in college and I just have more spaciousness to kind of figure out like what other forms of writing can I engage in. I am really kind of like project driven, if that makes sense. Like I get obsessed about like a thing that I want to do, and then I kind of just like throw myself headlong into it. So in the past, like what's interesting about this question for me is like, I think I always had project goals, never business goals. Because I would be like, I want to do this thing. I want to write this book. And so how do I get the resources that I need to write this book? Like the reason I ended up with this residency was because I was trying to get resources to complete a manuscript that is going to come out this fall from BOA about the genocide that happened in my country in the 1960s. So I was like, that was how I thought for a very long time about work, was just, how do I get the book done? Like, what do I need to do to be able to get it done? And now it's like, I'm shifting to kind of think about like, well, what do I need, not just for a project, but for my personhood? And so it's a different like frame of mind. I do want to add that like in the last couple of years, I was able to, I got recruited by a bookings agency, and it has been a huge help, because they do go out for, they like go and outreach and like find places for you, and then you build relationships with those places, and then sometimes they will want you to come back, and then it kind of becomes a reiterative relationship. And I think I can relate to what you were saying, Denise, about like then things start to kind of snowball as word gets out that that's what you're doing. Because like I think just for very long, I had so little availability, because the nature of nonprofit work is just, they're very often more than full time. And so for years I was just like saying no to things. And it's interesting to sort of see what happens when you start being able creating the space in your life to say yes. But it does take that kind of planning. It takes sort of it takes savings. It takes betting on yourself. I really like how you put that, Denise. And then it also takes getting smart about and then you also have to kind of fight for the specifics. So like one thing that I would add around publications and contracts in that situation. So one of the things that a book publisher will want to do is they want to have as much rights to like your work as possible, similar to, in the entertainment industry. And sometimes they will want to kind of limit even the work that you can produce in a specific period of time. Like if we are publishing your book in, I don't know, 2020, then sometimes it's part of the contract that you can't write something else or publish something else with someone else until like 2 years later. But like that's not necessary, like it's none of their business, I think personally, like however many books you want to write and like who you want to publish it with, right? But like that's like a fine print that I have like learned to look out for now. Another one is sometimes like a book publisher will ask for exclusive rights to your next work. And sometimes it's a little bit harder to negotiate with, but you can negotiate like the amount of time that they have before they have to say like, we are committing to this book or not. Like, so sometimes they will say, we have exclusive rights to your next work for us to say yes or no to for like 6 months. That's too fucking long. So that's just too long. Like you can tell them, I'm like, it's a poetry. If it's going to be a poetry collection, you can read it in like a week or less, so you can kind of negotiate to lower that time so that you don't lose a bunch of time. Like if they say no, you didn't lose a bunch of time where you could have been shopping the work to other publishers. Because there is also like, I did 2 books with Northwestern, and there is like a really huge part of it that you get to build a relationship with the house. You get to build a relationship with an editor who really believes in your work. And I really value that relationship. So I think that there's like, there's this kind of thing that you have to manage that I also want to add, particularly because in poetry, the community is not that big. Like people do know each other. For me, relationships are the wealth, if that makes sense. Because that's the thing that keeps on giving. Like that's the gift that keeps on giving. Yeah. So if let's say I'm like, okay, I'm doing a collaboration or a contract with like this person, and the contract is like not ideal, and I have tried my best to negotiate it to get to where I want to be, then that's my question. It's like, how important is this relationship to me? Because it's not just about that moment, it's about the next moment and the next moment. And of course, like you should never say yes to something that you don't feel like you can live with. I think that's like where lawyers can be really handy. It's like, because they explain to you, like, these are the terms that you will have to live with if you sign this thing. Right. But I think I would also say, like, I think there's a lot in the poetry community that, because it is like it is a more niche part of the literary world. we don't get a massive part of the pie. Like, that's just true. You know, like a lot, it's not, there's not a lot of money in it. And I think that for me, it's been more important to make sure that with the people that I really, really want to roll with, it's like I really show up for those relationships. And like, in addition to the contract, for example, like I'll say one last quick thing is, okay, let's say, I'll use this last example, actually, like this collaboration with Yolanda. Like I really, really value my relationship with Yolanda, like poetically, aesthetically, personally. Like I just think like she's one of the most amazing people I've ever met. And I always want to have her in my life. So for me, that means when I sign a contract, and you know, sometimes like friendship, like people talk about like don't mix friendships with money and like whatever. And sometimes that's hard, again, also because the community is small. But it's like I want to make sure I am showing up at my best, especially for the people that I have that I care about those relationships with. Does that make sense? So it's like it's more important to me to show up really, really well for people that I care about than we're just like a
The relationships are the
a
wealth.
corporation.
That was the gem that you just dropped. The relationships are the wealth. So important, super important to like everybody on this call or this webinar right now. Also, just want to plug before we go into Tripita that, you know, the Authors Guild has lawyers that do review contracts for publishing TV, film, speaking engagements. So you could become a member and that would become a resource. And I know that there are other organizations like that that offer legal services for artists for free. You know, I know there's a service like that in Philly that you can bring contracts to a lawyer kind of on call and have them review. But yeah, shout out to the Authors Guild for providing that resource to writers. And just also want to say that like a ton of questions in the Q&A. Y'all are on fire. I mean, like, we're not going to be able to, I'm just going to be honest, we're not going to be able to answer all these questions. But I also see that there are other writers answering some of the questions. So this is a community full of resources. And, you know, if you feel like you can answer that question, jump in there. You have that prerogative. And I value the wisdom of this community that's gathered here today. So I appreciate that for folks who are already doing that. Thank you. Tripita, how do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, so I think I'm just going to talk about, I mean, this is rich information. I'm learning so much about our fellow writers. For me, you know, as Denise said, I've always, and to this day, I do my own bookings. I receive the emails, responding to them, sometimes a little late, but I do respond to them. And then I also put on events and collaborate with, you know, Yolanda, and have done so for years, and others. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the goal, I guess, for me as a writer. I've never been interested in an agent or lawyer or anything like that. That's never been a thing for me, although I know that when I get to that point, or if it gets to that point, I'm going to embrace it just like everybody else. It's all good. For me, the word is balance, right? So someone asked that in the chat, in the questions. How do you continue to protect what's sacred in your writing and balance that with all of these other things? I've always applied a business framework, you know, along the way in my art. Like, I do think it's important not to be, you know, too sloppy with your books, or, you know, taxes and all these different things that you want to do. You want to kind of do that. And I've also been careful about structure and planning and all these things that are really important, whether you have an agent or whether you're performing or reading or doing book contracts. There are still things that you have to kind of apply. So for the next goal for me, I think it's more like preparation. How am I putting all these tools and things in place? Because things that I enjoy doing is community-based, embedded, you know, projects that are embedded in the community. I love working with youth. I love working in schools, but it doesn't mean that you can't get compensated for those things, and you shouldn't be compensated for those things. So I want to hone what I'm doing, Yolanda, and really turn that, as we've discussed before, like really into a practice. so that I could, transition. It is a practice, right? But right now it is, okay, you're either doing your social work, clinical work, or you're doing your poetry. But I do think that there's room to be able to hone that practice. And this is what I want to kind of tell to the people out here. There are things that you're naturally doing. You're doing it in your 9 to 5 or second or third shift or whatever we have to do to make a living. There are ways that you can look at those things and figure out how much of this can inform your artistic practice. And then who's interested in what you're doing with this artistic practice? I've been doing that a lot. Do I need to form an organization? It doesn't have to be a 501c3. It can be a corporation or a business or LLC or whatever. Do I need to make sure my accounting straight and my taxes straight? I get that, because when you are kind of go for NEH grants and all these other things, you have to be straight, be able to get some of this stuff. To like Denise, I think at a point, I am going to the emails are a little harder to respond to, and they do come and you have to be responsive. Someone asked me a question about my poet laureate tenure, and I would say that's when I felt the most overwhelmed. I managed to get it all done, but it was really overwhelming not having that support. So someone like an assistant or someone that can help you just organize, even something like updating my website hasn't been done. And I think that when you have this other job and all these other responsibilities, some people on here are parents as well, and you have all this stuff going on, you want to remember the core of it is this craft that we love, and the fact that it has to reach people, and you have to be healthy enough to be able to reach people, and you can't be healthy if you don't have these supports. So really, I'm just looking at what do I need to support me so that it can free up space to build a practice that I can then formalize and monetize to the point where I'm still feeding into doing the things that I love. And so kind of next step, just thinking about practice and preparation and how to balance it all.
Thank you, Tripita. Thank you all for answering that question. I want to shout out Angel Hogan in the Q&A for suggesting we do a podcast for this thing.
All right.
Honestly, there's so many different rooms to this conversation, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
When you think about contracts, when you think about copyright, when you think about publishing, you talk about performance. But, at the center of it all is money. And there's a couple of folks that are asking, how do you set your fees? How do you set your rates? This is like the big question. And I want to just say, yes, you should be getting paid. Let's just get that one out the way. This whole doing stuff for free. We want to stop that. You should be asking for something. Sometimes I'm interested. I could answer this question for myself, but I'm more interested in what y'all have to say. And maybe Cynthia, we'll start with you this time.
Sure. How do I set my rates? This is kind of a hard question because I think my rates have also wildly fluctuated, and they're variant because it really depends on who I'm working with. I often do work for much less for organizations and spaces and communities that I know are not resourced, and I know that actually the poetry is going to go so much farther actually in some of these spaces. So that would be in the range of I don't know, several $100s, let's say, for a single performance, for a reading or something like that. For universities, my rates would be much higher because they are resourced places. So I think the most that I've been paid to do to speak or perform at university is $5,000, and that's a high end. And most of the time it's in the 2,500 range. And that would be, for a workshop or a poetry performance. And of course, if it requires travel, it's y'all got to pay for all of that, So for me, I'm like, it's really important that they also cover accommodations, travel, like any extenuating costs related to getting there. And then for consults, I actually have only started doing this. I'm gonna be offering manuscript consultations through this summer. And I actually struggled a lot with setting my rates for this because I know the kind of attention that I bring to a manuscript, because I've done this for like many people in the past for free, because they were like friends and colleagues, and it was not something that I felt I had enough kind of consistency in my life to kind of offer on an ongoing basis, because it is actually so much work. So like go into a manuscript and really close read it and like assess it, engage and talk with it. So for me, what I have landed on so far right now, it's like $10 a page. And then I set a minimum so that I know that I'm going to engage with something that comes in that's worth my time. It's like, so minimum like 30 pages. And that's the rate I'm setting for now. And, as time goes, like I will assess that. I'm like, do I want to lower it? Do I want to increase it? But that feels fair to me for at least the amount of energy and attention that I know I will pour into it. Because if I poured that kind of time and energy into it when I was doing it for free, I for sure will do it when I'm getting paid. So if that makes sense. So I don't know, does that answer your question? With like, I feel like with commissions, it's a little bit more, it's very case by case. It super depends on what the thing is. So like I've been paid $1,000 to like write like a script for an app, for example, for like an app that has like regular episodes. I have been paid like a couple thousand to like write an essay for like a thing. So and then sometimes it's like they're only offering a couple of $100, but then you think about, okay, so like how big is the platform? Right? So like that's the other thing. So you just kind of, there's like multiple things at stake. That's not just about like the money. Like I think about who's the editor on the other side and what kind of relationship do I want to have with that editor? Because editors move, they will move places, and like if you have a relationship with them, you can come with them. So I think about that. I think about like the audience size for the platform. I think about, can I commit the time and energy to do a really good job on this? Because anytime you like write something that I'm proud of, because sometimes like some commissions will happen like so fast. They're like, they need something in like 48 hours. So if I don't feel like I can deliver the quality on that, I would rather say no, because I don't want a piece of my work out there that I can't stand behind just because and I may have gotten like $500 out of it. I can make $500 somewhere else. That makes sense. Yeah. But I think that is like, I think about that, like having work out there that you can stand behind, being more important for the long run, if that makes sense.
So Denise, I'm interested. Thank you, Cynthia. Denise, I'm interested in that Sprite money and that college touring money. Like, what does that look like?
Cynthia dropped a lot of gems. I think probably the first college gig I had charged like $500 all inclusive, right? I typically do all inclusive because I just like to book my own travel, especially if I'm going to another gig after that. So I'll typically tag on like $500 for every gig, ideally, which will cover, sometimes you go to Cali, it's more, right? It ends up working itself out. So I tend to do all inclusives. I think the range for university speaking engagements, I think, is spot on. Typically 1,000, for something maybe more local, even 500 for something in your city, for a classroom visit, right? I think a classroom visit would be different than maybe a school-wide thing. Up to, I think, typically like 5,000 or 6,000 would be the high end. Obviously, there are authors and speakers who get paid 10 and 20,000, but right, most of us are not going to be getting that. And there may be booking agents that take a percentage of that. I think, again, it's really about who's doing the ask and what's the platform and what's the budget. There's a bit of a dance when you get an inquiry about, that I think all of us do is the person inquiring typically wants to know what your number is first. Mm-hmm. Because that mean that they might have a budget that's much bigger than that, but you said $2,000, right? And so depending on, again, if it's a school, we typically know what the budgets tend to be. But if it's anything outside of that, and even foundations, sometimes there are really large foundations, right, with endowments. That's not your local nonprofit that maybe you're happy with doing it for free. I'll do bigger paying things to subsidize the things that I don't even want money from because it matters to me that much. And because I know these are nonprofits and community-based organizations doing really good work. But for, you'll sometimes want to ask what the budget is, because that can put you in the ballpark and say, I don't want to throw out a number that's not in the ballpark of even what's possible. Right. But I always like to think of negotiating as the beginning of the conversation and not the end of the conversation, just because there's so much fear in throwing out a number, right? Mm-hmm. I get it. I have it all the time, especially when that number is, you know what, I'm going to charge something more, right? It's scary to say, I deserve this, in just the narrative in our own minds, right? That we've been fed, right? That we don't deserve this, to say, no, this is what I'm worth, right? That is a conversation that I have been having with myself for a long time. And it's taken a lot of trial and error and calling up writer friends and saying, is this too much? We still do this. Is this too much? Is this too much? Yeah. And you know what? I'm going to say, bitch, no, it's not. Charge it, right? Because they got it 9 times out of 10. And I feel really passionately, because when we demand more, everyone wins, right? When someone comes to me and I say, for example, right, let's just throw out a number, $1,000 for something, right? And they say, well, sorry, we only have 500. But then they go to Cynthia and Cynthia says, no, I'm $1,000. Oh, oftentimes I've had people in other industries, right, outside of the small poetry world, right, conferences, the brands, like schools, right, they actually have been saying to me, what is the rate for poets? They don't know. They don't. We have to be the ones to set it. And so by Cynthia charging what she's worth, and Raina charging what she's worth, and Tripita and Yolanda charging what they're worth, we all win, because they cannot go around trying to get the lowest bidder, right? If you want a poet at a particular level with these kinds of credentials in this, with these kinds of expertise, like this is what it costs. And we have to also train them. And so I want us to take that power. So for me, there was a period of time where I would increase my rate by $500 every year. Yep. Because if the gigs are growing and people are saying, yes, I'll give you $2,000. Yes, then I'm not charged. Then something occurs to me that, if they're saying yes so quickly, and no one has a problem with my fee, no one has to go and talk to anybody, no one needs a co-sponsor, then maybe I'm not charging enough. And so it's a constant conversation as to what Cynthia said. And I definitely think that being in a community of writers, that you can call on your writer friends and ask them, especially if you get an inquiry that you haven't experienced before, is incredibly valuable. And brands are going to be a whole other thing. And I'll leave that for maybe the podcast.
I love it. That's why I asked you to be on here, because we have these conversations. Sometimes we text each other and be like, this is the offer. What do y'all think about this? Tripita, we've all done this, right? And I think this is why we have to talk about it. This is why we have to be talking in private and not necessarily coveting opportunities for ourselves, right? It's about this kind of community wealth of information and resources that we have to share with one another.
Can I tag in on that about sharing? Because that's also something that I think has to be brought into the conversation of, sometimes the opportunity is great money. It don't fit with your schedule. Pass it on. Pass it on to somebody else, right?
That's right.
Like, you're looking for this? Okay, I know this person over here. And pass the abundance on, because it's going to come back to you. It's going to come back to you.
And just
Mhm.
because a budget doesn't work for you, to your point,
Right.
Raina, maybe there's a young poet and you're
Right.
like, they would be great for this.
Mhm.
Pass
Mhm.
it on. But I just want to reiterate one last point. When you throw out a number, that is the beginning of the conversation. It
That's
is
right.
not the end of the
At the
conversation.
end. No.
Even if they come back and say, I'm sorry, we don't have that. Okay, well, what does your budget look like, right?
Right.
Let's have that conversation. And
Have you
so that's what I
considered
remind myself.
partnering with another organization? Like,
Right,
you know,
right.
because sometimes initial, like starting organizers have not considered collaboration, right? They're starting to reach out, especially at a university or something where the person is the president of the student group and this is their first thing that they're organizing, right? They don't know that they can reach out and get some money from this pot and this pot and this pot. But like you even just saying, have you considered reaching out to other organizations that you're...
And that goes back to what Trapita said about knowing your audience, knowing your expertise, right? Can we is it the Women's Center collaborating with the Asian Studies Department, right? Like what collaborations can happen out of this? Yeah.
I do think negotiation is really important. I think that's key. And not being afraid to. Denise raised an important point. I always ask, what is your budget? And they will come back. It's like a volleyball match. No. So what would you want to do? No. I would, if you let me know your budget, and I can let you know where I am, where I fall between it. And you do it with a straight face and do it with a lot of confidence. It's not easy. I know I stumbled in the beginning because it was like, oh, I'm going to tell them this. And it's okay to pass on things that don't fit well with your personal integrity and what you want to do. Because Yolanda and I have had these conversations where someone calls you from X place and they want you to do whatever. And oh no, weren't they in the paper for, having crappy housing for people in whatever? So not to always tie it all into the money piece, but to also look at how's this feeding into me. One thing that someone said, I think it's really important too about pricing and asking and telling them what you need is also being able to say, as you said, Raina, are you working with someone else? One of the best experience I've had is someone saying to me, and he was very transparent, we know that there's more in the budget and I'm glad that you asked. Because if you don't ask, you won't know. So you do have to kind of ask. Like Denise, I sometimes will do things that are really, really important to me, but I will make a point to, and I don't charge or whatever, but I will make a point to say, this is a donation. And ordinarily, this is what I charge. And those are far and few in between in terms of what I would do. But if it's a specific cause or something that I know it's important to me, but I will question about, is there a budget for this? How did you fund this in the past? And I think it's okay to have those conversations with people. But negotiation, that is the beginning of the conversation. And it's okay to stand firm in what you are asking for.
And so when to your point, to build off of what you're saying, Trapita, for whatever the project is, let's say you get paid $2,000 or $3,000 and you used to charge $1,500. Well, now your rate is $2,000, $3,000. And you use that. And what you say in your next email is, for similar projects, I have received this, or my rate is this, right? If the next time you get paid $5,000 for something that is very similar, that should be your goal, your baseline. And you can say, I have received this for similar projects.
Right.
I want to add another thing for the metric of consideration. I really appreciated Cynthia speaking to manuscripts and thinking about the amount of time and determining the time in connection with what's worth the time and all that. We're talking a lot about the big gigs as well as the small gigs, like, okay, it's a school, this is a donation and things. I also think about how to determine how much time that this is taking away from your creation. So for example, like if there's a college well-resourced gig and this is going to take actually significant time from other things, like with preparation, with traveling, with whatever, that has to be part of your calculations. also a part of your calculations could be, could be that what's your rent? What's your mortgage? Double that. Double that. So if you get 1 gig this month, right? You get 1 gig this month, that's double your mortgage. You now have a little bit of savings in your pocket where you can create. You can just be. So that's a good goal, right? To reach out to venues and say, okay, I know they're going to be resourced, whether agented or not, but your metric is, I want to create enough space for the freedom of my own thought and for me to feel safe and secure. Yeah. And so what is the metric for your success? And then you can, for you to create, for you to be fully sustained and nourished and flourishing, that should go into what you charge to.
Wow. Okay. Y'all just dropped a whole lot of wisdom on this group. And some people aren't even ready for this. I want to kind of go backwards. Like, let's go back to like somebody who's just starting out, somebody who just got out of an MFA program, somebody who's coming out of high school and wants to do some work as a poet. Can y'all time travel back a little further to like, what are some foundational things this emerging writer seeking to get to where a lot of you are could be doing to lay kind of a great foundation for the work ahead?
Can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
So my first publication gave me a check for $8. I've been telling this story a lot, and I took my $8 check and I bought some supermarket sushi. It was my celebration for myself. My whole check into that. My first little bit of money wasn't check; it was cash. Was $50. I won a slam, and those two things were like, I am a poet now. I can buy books. I also think that my hustle in college was that I self-published a whole bunch of chapbooks. I put them in the local independent bookstore, and every time I had a reading, I had my hustle chapbooks. The printers, the copiers in town, they were my buddies. They set me up with a saddle stapler. I got that like in my pocket, ready at all times. And then I did a lot of events actually at that bookstore, Webster's bookstore in State College. And every time I made some money, I bought some more books. It didn't really go very far, but I think that folks first starting out, you have to get your work out there. You also have to have good work. So you have to be dedicated to your craft, get the work out there, connect with people. And I think that like sending the work, because that's the thing, like you're never gonna have the big gig down the line if it's just in your journal. And that's beautiful. If that's your process and that's where you want to process and create, wonderful. And there are fellowships that will support you in that creation. There are, you gotta look for them. So there is the hustle that you gotta cultivate too, as part of the early process, in my opinion.
Anybody else want to answer that one?
Yeah, I remember at a stage, for me, it's like, if really just trying to make it happen for yourself. My first book that I did was self-published. I used my work money to do it, but I did it from the framework of I really wanted, this is really important to me, and I put a lot of energy and effort into it. So the doors won't always open the way you want them to open. Sometimes you have to do it yourself. I also look at being entrepreneurial and being an entrepreneur. So sometimes an entrepreneurial mindset is, I'm just going to throw everything out there and see what sticks and see what works. Oh, such and such they just did this slam or did whatever, and I can do that too. Whereas I think the second part of it is thinking about it from an entrepreneur aspect, is to be able to say, what can I hone? Like Raina said, what's my craft? How can I hone this craft to be able to turn it into something? How do I, being really intentional and thoughtful about it. So yeah, if you want to do something, do it yourself. Let me tell you, sometimes doors are just not open to you. You do it yourself. You want to make some cards with your poetry. You want to be able to get out there and read. hone your craft in places too that will welcome you. We've been all talking about schools and community venues. That's a good place to build your practice. There's a good place to do that. And then you can kind of build it into something else. And I think also listening to internally, like what works for you, what works for all of us on this panel is very different. Some of us have some things in common that we've done, but it's not going to be the same thing for all of us. You have to just stick to what works for you and hone that, practice that, and have confidence in it, and get out there and do it.
Can I add one quick thing? Because yes, to both what Reina and Trapita were saying, I'm going to add a little bit of the romantics note to the pot, because I think that I don't want to speak for others. I have not found it easy to be a poet. Mm-hmm. And because of that, I really need to love the work. Mm-hmm. So I think I also just want to say, and as someone who also did a lot, I had to do a lot of other things to make ends meet, and also still create, because that's what I needed to do. I think what I have gained from that is, and I think this is true of everyone here as well. It's like trust your poetry, trust your poetic desire, trust the fact that you want to make things, and that no matter what, because we can say all of this stuff, and we literally just came out on the other side of a pandemic that completely changed the economy over the last 2 years. We don't know how it's going to keep changing the economy. Inflation is freaking bananas. I also just want to affirm, there is no bad work. And there is no work. The beautiful thing about being a writer is every part of your life can be a part of your writing work. If you gotta drive Lyft, I'm you are going to get so much good shit, so much good material for your writing. If you have to barista, you are going to get so much experience from that feeds your writing. So it is also about how you decide to let these experiences enter you, and how you decide to meet them, because that's the beauty about being an artist. We can work with anything. Mm-hmm. And we can make under any conditions, and it's and that we still have to fight for exactly what it's we want the boats to rise for everybody. We should be paid for our work. We charge those kinds of numbers because when we're writing the poem, we actually work for free. It's you're front loading the free work, and then you have to charge for it after, for the conditions that allowed you to create that work. But Yolanda,
that was all philosophical and deep though.
Sorry.
No, I loved it. You blew my mind. Thank you.
So I guess I would just protect your love for what you do. I think because the money and all of this stuff, the economy, the negotiate, they're also kind of shifting targets. They're moving targets all the time, which is why we should have these conversations much more regularly, to kind of assess how things are changing. That's right. But no matter what, I think that would be my last advice, is just really protect your love for what you make.
Yeah, you got to bust through this romance and demystify the life of the poet, because the life of the poet that I was sold as a little girl was very romantic, and I did not know how I was going to make my way up the crystal stair to get there. Denise, you want some of this?
Yeah, I think, to sort of jump off what Cynthia so beautifully said, is you have to love what you do. You have to love what you're making. You have to be putting in the work, and it can't be external. It can't be about chasing, something outside of yourself. And I think it's good to have goals, but there are some writers who I think set themselves up for heartbreak by having goals that are very externally based. I want to be published in this particular press or by this house. And if I don't, then my work isn't good. That to me is I think it's a little bit, it's external. It's a little bit on the surface. It's a little, that's just not what motivates me. I have been writing poetry since before I received $1, and I would be writing it if I didn't receive any money, because it is what moves me. It is what changes my life. It is what sort of to try to write myself into a better version of myself, right? It is how I survived. It is the first time I ever came out publicly was in a poem when I was 19 years old at the New Eurekan Poets Cafe. I then from that moment on said, I have to be more honest in my personal life because poetry is demanding that from me. And then I had to come out to my mom and my father and my family later that year. But I did it first in the poetry because I felt like I could be a stronger version of myself and I felt supported. And so community has been the first, the second, the third, and the last thing. Everything else in between is just trying to fund the shit that I love to do and to be around and to bring along the people that I love to do it with, that I believe in, is to open as many doors as I can for people to come, behind me because someone has done that for me, right? And a lot of us are sometimes the only poets in certain rooms, which is an incredible opportunity, right? To just be a force and to be an advocate for this beautiful art form and all the things that it can do and all of the ways that it seeps into public life, right? And so if you're an emerging poet, and I know we're running out of time here, so I'll sort of wrap up. I have to say, just find your writing community first. Don't worry about the views. Don't worry about how many events you've done. If you're just starting, you really need to keep that at the center. And I'm not saying that these other things don't matter, but these are when no one is calling you, when you're not getting your work published, when you're getting rejection after rejection, you will keep making because it is the thing that you need to do to breathe, to live, right? To be. And that, again, is at the center of everything that I do. Right. And so if you're a young poet, I will just say, find your local workshop. If you don't have a poetry organization at your school, make one. I did, right? Put up flyers, get a petition, right? If you don't see it, you make it, right? Like build your poetry community. That is what's going to feed you, feed your work. It is what's going to help you cut your teeth. It is, know your craft. That's first and foremost, right? And I think, for a young poet, it is important to not be writing in isolation. That's not for me where my poems happen. They happen in conversation. So again, find your people, find your community, and I don't chase an audience. I create the things that matter to me and the audience will come, right?
That's right.
Audience will come, right? And so keep those things in mind. And always, I think we start from here. And if we're lucky, maybe we get to do some cool things on the way. But first and foremost, we get to change our lives and the people around us.
Yes. And the universe will reward you handsomely. It hears you. You will be rewarded.
Always the longer road over the short road, right? Always the long-term relationships. Yeah.
That's right.
Cynthia, you want to jump in before I say the last word?
Nah, I think. Oh, I'm sorry. That was an accident.
I was like, you didn't have to raise your hand.
I was so excited that I.
Oh, okay. You were like, hallelujah. Okay.
Yes, exactly.
Y'all are so amazing. I knew this would be amazing. I just knew because we needed to bring this conversation kind of out of the private space and into the public. And I'm so grateful for the response that we received from all of you who joined us this evening. Put your questions in the chat and responded. Everybody who shared their own collective wisdom, and to the panelists, Denise Frobin, Raina Leone, Trapita B. Mason, Cynthia Dewi Oka. Thank you for just the generosity of spirit that you've given today in the chat, verbally. I want to end with a quote by Muriel Rukeyser. She said, in school, we are taught how precious poetry is to civilization, but we are not told how to use it. And I think tonight we just heard some ways to put poetry to use for ourselves, but also for our world, for our community. This is spirit work, this is healing work. And I hope that you have felt the love that we all have and the passion we have for this craft. And I hope it continues to bless the rest of your year and your life. So thanks for joining us. Thanks to the Authors Guild. Thanks to Blue Stoop for hosting this. Thank you, Johnny.
Thank you. Thanks
Yolanda.
everyone for being here.
Thank you, Yolanda.
Yes, thank you. This is great.
Virtual applause.
Thank you. This was amazing.
Thank
This
you,
was a
Johnny.
great, candid, encouraging talk. I loved it. And I know everyone appreciated it a lot. Thank you all. All right, everyone stay in touch and have a good evening. Thank you.
All right. Thanks for having us. Peace, everyone. Good night.